Hello, you're watching Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel on the 13th of October 2011. In today's programme, we're going to look at the government's plans to increase the unfair dismissal qualifying period from 1 to 2 years from April next year and what this means for employers. We'll also touch on the proposals regarding the introduction of tribunal fees. We'll then look at a recent Employment Appeal Tribunal case on the scope of reasonable adjustments in disability discrimination claims. And finally, an update on the government's employment law phase of the Red Tape Challenge and how you can get involved. You'll recall that in January this year, the government issued a consultation setting out wide-ranging proposals to change the current system for resolving workplace disputes, including a reform of the employment tribunal system. Two of the key proposals were an increase in the qualifying period for unfair dismissal claims to 2 years and the introduction of a tribunal fee, payable at the point the claim form is submitted. Taking those in turn, the government has recently confirmed that from the 6th of April next year, 2012, the qualifying period of continuous employment for an employee to be able to bring a simple unfair dismissal claim will extend from 1 to 2 years. The government has stated that these changes could save British businesses nearly £6 million a year by reducing the number of unfair dismissal claims in the employment tribunals by 2,000. Dr Stephen Hardy, an employment law barrister at 9 St John Street Chambers, comments on what this change means for employers.
Well, this isn't the first time, of course, that British business has had to face such a change, because employers will recall in 1985 that the Thatcher government changed the 6-month qualifying period to 2 years, and that 2-year qualifying period for unfair dismissal lasted for over 14 years. Of course, it didn't go without controversy, because at the time the then Equal Opportunities Commission challenged the 2-year qualifying period as being disproportionate, in fact indirectly discriminatory, to women. And of course, as employers will recall, that legal challenge went to Europe, and in the celebrated case of Seymour Smith, it was decided that it was disproportionate, in fact borderline disproportionate, for there to be a 2-year qualifying period. And that led, of course, in 1999 to the then incoming Labour government to revert back to the 1-year rule, which we've had now for the last 12 years. So the legal change proposed by the government isn't necessarily new. It has an advantage and a disadvantage for employers. The advantage the government claims will be a reduction in unfair dismissal claims. So the likelihood for employers is that there won't be more claims than usual, and the government anticipates there'll be 2,000 claims less. In fact, last year there were 47,900 unfair dismissal claims. That was 10,000 less than the year before, but the government still anticipates there'll be a reduction by bringing in the 2-year rule. So that's good news for employers. However, the bad news is, of course, as the Advisory and Conciliation Service showed, for every year that we had the 2-year qualifying period, there was an increase by 15% in discrimination cases. And I anticipate that there will be a similar increase because, of course, no qualifying period is required for discrimination cases, and more importantly, whistleblowing cases also don't require. So I expect to see and anticipate there will be increases in those. So employers will face more whistleblowing cases and probably, I expect, a lot more discrimination claims as a consequence of these changes. But of course, we shall see. Watch this space, I think, is the best I can say.
Thanks, Stephen. The government's also proposing to introduce fees to bring employment tribunal claims from April 2013. Consultation on this had been due to take place in the spring, but it's now thought that it will happen this November. The government believes that introducing fees will help to reduce the number of spurious and vexatious claims. The consultation paper will include proposals as to the exact amounts that will be charged and how the fees will be paid. One suggestion is that successful claimants will be entitled to a refund of the fee paid. We'll keep you updated on the consultation, as no doubt the employment team at Addleshaw Goddard will be responding to the proposals, both for itself and on behalf of our clients. And now turning to a recent case on the scope of reasonable adjustments in disability discrimination claims, which should provide some comfort to employers. We reported briefly on the tribunal decision in Cordell and Foreign and Commonwealth Office in our news programme on the 10th of December last year, and the Employment Appeal Tribunal decision is now available. In this case, the tribunal held that the FCO didn't breach its duty to make reasonable adjustments when it withdrew an offer to post a deaf employee to Kazakhstan. The tribunal felt that the costs of the proposed adjustments to support Mrs Cordell in the new post, which included lip speaker support totalling around £300,000 a year, were unreasonable. Again, Stephen comments on this case in more detail and what it means for employers.
Well, again, this is a very timely reminder from the Employment Appeal Tribunal about the importance of being able to balance proportionality when considering reasonable adjustments. It's often been the case, in many cases we've seen over the years, that reasonable adjustments are seen as an obligation, and a definite obligation. In fact, they are obligations, but they're an obligation with a proportionate balancing exercise. An assessment of the actual cost is a consideration. In this case, reiterates that. It's very interesting that the president, or the outgoing president of the Employment Appeal Tribunal, Mr Justice Underhill, makes clear that it isn't necessarily proportionate from the outset because it is an obligation. In fact, it was disproportionate in this case because it was an excessive adjustment based upon solely the cost. You'll recall, as you reported, and the Employment Appeal Tribunal upheld the original tribunal decision, which you reported, which essentially Mrs Cordell was a senior diplomat in Poland, transferred to Kazakhstan. As a consequence, there was an increase in her lip service support that she required in excess of £300,000. Consequence of those facts, although the government could actually afford the change, it was deemed to be disproportionate to the circumstances. So again, it's very important for employers not only to undertake their obligations as they must in terms of reasonable adjustments, but clearly now under the Equality Act, a reminder, as this case does, that there needs to be an assessment of finances, and if that is an imperative disproportionate exercise, then that is a defence for not carrying out the reasonable adjustment, as was plainly the case in these exceptional circumstances in the Cordell and Foreign Commonwealth Office case. However, I would add it is for the employer to, when assessing reasonable adjustments, to consider finances amongst other factors. But clearly here on the radar is finances again, and in times such as we live, economic downturn, it's obviously a relevant consideration, and that was emphatically confirmed by the EAT in this case.
Thanks, Stephen. And finally, the government has recently launched the next phase of its Red Tape Challenge, and this phase focuses on employment law issues. For a period of 3 weeks, ending on the 19th of October, the public is invited to comment on how employment regulations can be simplified, better implemented or enforced, or abolished. Examples of regulations that the government is seeking views on include the rules on collective redundancies, employment agencies, immigration checks, the national minimum wage and statutory sick pay, to make sure they're fit for purpose and easier for businesses to understand. The results will be published later this year. And as part of this phase of the Red Tape Challenge, the BIS has also published a discussion paper posing questions on how management can be improved, how the fear factor in recruitment can be reduced, and which employment rights are fundamental. You can provide your comments through the Red Tape Challenge website, and we've included a link to the website together with the BIS discussion paper below the screen. So that's all for today from Addleshaw Goddard's Employment Channel. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.